Wow. Yeah, it would be great if she could be the last girl in the world with that story. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished speakers here today, I have to say I'm extremely moved to see this sea of orange that is not just a sea, it's every one of you wearing orange with a big, strong, powerful message. I'm Melissa Fleming. I'm Undersecretary General for Global Communications here at the United Nations. And I'm real warm welcome, especially to those of you who came from outside and have come into the United Nations today for this very special occasion, and also to all of you who are joining us on webcast. Very welcome. Thank you because you're joining us here to stand against rape and to be a part of generation equality. I think our voices together can be a very powerful chorus. Our presence here today is one of the many hopeful signs of a growing global movement and global momentum that will stop rape, not just in war, but also in peace and in our lifetimes. Stopping sexual violence against women is an issue very close to my heart. I worked for UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, for 10 years, and I remember so vividly the refugee women and girls I met and who entrusted me with their stories of having been raped as a weapon of war. Deliberate attacks of the worst kind, designed to denigrate, humiliate, to destroy families, to ruin communities, and mostly as an attempt to ruin their dignity. At the same time, I can see how much committed people like us can achieve. Some of these people will be sharing their stories with us here today. Their dedication and fearlessness will inspire all of us to speak even louder and do more. We are gathered here today to commemorate the International Day to End Violence Against Women under the umbrella of the United Nations Secretary General's campaign. It's called Unite by 2030 to End Violence Against Women. You will see the campaign's vibrant signature orange color lighting up this room today. This orange color is a symbol of our vision of a brighter orange future, free of violence against women and girls. Through Unite, governments, civil society, women's organizations, young people, businesses, the media, and the entire United Nations system are working together to stop the global pandemic of violence against women and girls. Today also marks the start of the United Nations activities through the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. This is, as many of you know, an annual international civil society-led campaign which runs until 10th of December, which is also Human Rights Day. These are the activities at the UN that will follow a global theme. And the global theme this year is Orange the World. Generation equality stands against rape. The theme embodies the Secretary General's decision to commit the Unite campaign for the next 2 years to highlighting rape as a specific form of harm committed against women and girls and working to prevent it and to end it. It aligns with UN Women's Generation Equality, Realizing Women's Rights for an Equal Future campaign, and also marks, and this is all aligned, next year's 25th anniversary of the 1995 Fourth World Conference on Women in Beijing. Through Generation Equality, women's advocates who shaped the conference's landmark commitments 25 years ago are joining hands with those now carrying that legacy forward. Today, they will finish making all of Beijing's commitments a reality. These include ending all forms of sexual harassment and violence against women and girls. We will need everyone to work hard because we have a lot to do in ending violence. This statistic is really shocking, but it is true. 1 in 3 women and girls in some point in their lives will experience it. Many, and that's also a shocking statistic that many of them, probably most of them, will never know justice. They will never see the perpetrators held accountable for their crimes. Impunity is widespread, but particularly for sexual violence and rape, which happens everywhere in the world, in every country, in every community, every social group. Exact numbers of rapes and sexual assaults are notoriously difficult to confirm because of this impunity, but also because of stigma and because of silence. Sexual violence is insidious. It flourishes where it is normalized and even glamorized. There is a tactic permission to objectify and control women's bodies, which leads to committing rape as well as blaming the victim, trivializing or denying that a violation has occurred, and of course, refusing to prosecute perpetrators. In wars, sexual violence and rape have been used as a deliberate tool to terrorize women and girls in their community. In recent years, the voices of survivors and activists through numerous campaigns that reach every part of the world have reached a crescendo. Their stories have sounded the alarm about the widespread violation of women's bodies and women's rights. They have cut through complacency and silence so that entire societies have started to realize that violence must end. Today, we've come together to hear from just a few of the people who are standing against violence in diverse regions of the globe and what compelling stories they have to tell. Part one of the program will feature speakers from the top echelons of the United Nations. Their presence here today demonstrates how UN leadership, and in fact, our entire UN system, stands behind the call to stand against rape. And they're joined today by two young women of remarkable courage who speak out for those, including children, who have experienced the devastating consequences of rape. Part two of the program will be an interactive discussion with award-winning artists and activists. And we can look forward to a rich exchange of their ideas and experience. And we have the wonderful UN International School Senior Chorus also performing with us today. So let me begin by welcoming our distinguished panel of speakers for part one. Ms. Maria Luisa Ribeiro Viotti is the UN's chef de cabinet for the Secretary General. Ms. Pramila Patten is the special representative of the UN Secretary General on sexual violence in conflict. Ms. Pumzila Mlambo Nguka is, did I say it right? Is the UN Women's Executive Director. Ms. Ajna Jusic is the president of the Association of Forgotten Children of War in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And Ms. Chinyere Iyo is executive director of Sexual Offenses Awareness and Victims Rehabilitation Initiative in Nigeria, which is a grantee of the UN Trust Fund to End Violence Against Women. Please join me in giving them a round of applause. It is my great pleasure to ask the chef de cabinet, Ms. Maria Luisa Ribeiro Viotti, to open this first part of the program on behalf of the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres. She will tell us why ending violence is one of our most important goals and fundamental to building peaceful and prosperous societies. You have the floor.
Thank you, Melissa. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome to all of you. Violence against women and girls is one of the most widespread and disturbing human rights violations in our world. 1/3 of women globally report having experienced violence at some point in their lives, mainly from their partners. As we go about our business, 1 woman in 3 that we encounter has been or will be subjected to violence. In some regions and for some groups of women, the rate is even far higher. And this is only the violence that is reported, so the real level is indeed far higher. A study conducted 4 years ago found that just 41% of countries have laws that explicitly criminalize marital rape. This widespread impunity for violence against half of the population sends a clear yet unacceptable message about the value of women's lives. Violence is harmful to the physical and mental health, well-being, and dignity of women and girls, but it also affects families, communities, and societies at large. Violence against women and girls has strong implications for global peace and security. It undermines the security of significant numbers of individuals. Rape and gender-related killings remain explicit tactics during conflicts. Violence against women also affects stability in societies. There is growing evidence of strong links between violent misogyny and violent extremism. A culture of violence against women also has serious consequences for our efforts to eradicate poverty and promote inclusive, sustainable development. Violence prevents women from participating in all areas of society in the decisions that impact their lives. It is a barrier to achieving the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, our roadmap for peaceful, prosperous lives on a healthy planet. Addressing violence against women and girls, therefore, is a crucial means of realizing the full range of the Sustainable Development Goals, from health to equality to education to decent work and economic growth. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we have to shine a light on the urgent necessity of eliminating all forms of violence against women and girls. And we literally do, under the headline, Orange the World, Generation Equality Stands Against Rape. We are lighting up iconic buildings around the world in orange, the color of the campaign. The Orange the World campaign honors women and girls who have experienced sexual violence. It also honors those who are taking action to prevent and end it, those who are challenging impunity for perpetrators and confronting a culture of rape everywhere. Let me set violence against women in its broader context. Gender equality is critical in its own right. We can never accept a world in which half the population suffers from discrimination and marginalization. We must address one of the most widespread human rights violations in the world if we are to move towards a better future for all. A strong women's movement that promotes gender equality has proven to be the single most effective way of ending violence against women and girls. Our programs must promote such movements. We must work with stakeholders to enable legal and institutional reforms, services for women and girls, data collection and analysis, and prevention. We must change attitudes and behaviors. The Spotlight Initiative, our partnership with the European Union to end all forms of violence against women and girls, includes all these elements. I encourage new partners to join Spotlight and make it into a universal platform by 2030. On the International Day to Eliminate Violence Against Women, the United Nations stands against rape, sexual harassment, and assault in all forms of violence against women and girls. We also stand with survivors, activists, and advocates around the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria Luisa, for that powerful message, also on behalf of the Secretary General. I am now honored to introduce to my right Ms. Pramila Patten, who is an Undersecretary General and the Secretary General's Special Representative on Sexual Violence and Conflict. She is the UN's global voice and also conscience on conflict-related sexual violence. In that capacity, she's called for converting cultures of impunity into cultures of justice and accountability. You have the floor, Pramila.
Thank you, Melissa. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I am very pleased to be part of this important event. And this year's theme is particularly relevant for my mandate, which was established by the Security Council in 2009 to provide coherent and strategic leadership to global efforts to combat conflict-related sexual violence as a threat to collective peace and security. Since taking office in 2017, I have articulated 3 strategic priorities. Firstly, converting cultures of impunity into cultures of deterrence through justice and accountability. Secondly, fostering national ownership and leadership for a sustainable, survivor-centered response. And thirdly, addressing the root causes of sexual violence, including structural gender-based inequality and discrimination, which are consistently exacerbated by armed conflict and militarization. Conflict-related sexual violence traverses all of history and geography, affecting all ages and generations. It has often been described as history's greatest silence, the least reported, least condemned crime of war. And it is precisely this silence that shields the perpetrators and isolates the victims. The trauma of conflict-related sexual violence causes lasting damage to individuals, families, and communities. We cannot erase the scars, but we can help victims and survivors to cope and heal by listening to them and providing tailored support. I have seen both the needs and the resilience of survivors firsthand during my field visits to many parts of the world, Mali, DRC, Iraq, Central African Republic, and other places. Last month, I commemorated the 10-year anniversary of my mandate by holding a survivors hearing and launching a new global fund to deliver assistance to victims whose right to reparations remains unmet. One of the survivors who testified at this event, an indigenous woman from Guatemala, said, "We don't want history to repeat itself. We are working for progress so that our children and grandchildren never have to experience what we suffered." 10 years is a short time in the history of war zone rape, a crime as old as war itself. Yet the past 10 years have seen more concerted action to combat this scourge than the rest of human history combined. Indeed, the past decade saw a dramatic paradigm shift that heralded a new consciousness and a new consensus about the gravity of conflict-related sexual violence as an international crime. What had long been dismissed as inevitable is now understood as preventable. What had once been deemed collateral or cultural is today condemned as criminal. Acknowledging that sexual violence is often commanded, committed, or condoned as a means of pursuing the military and ideological aims of armed groups has prompted political as well as humanitarian solutions. The progress we have made to date has been transformative in 3 aspects, namely in terms of the normative framework, our institutional capacity, and operational impact. Regarding the normative framework, 2008 saw the adoption of a breakthrough resolution, Resolution 1820. For the first time, the issue of conflict-related sexual violence was elevated onto the agenda of the world's paramount peace and security body, the United Nations Security Council. For the first time, the issue of conflict-related sexual violence was recognized as a threat to collective security and an impediment to peace. Resolution 1820 gave new responsibilities to security actors and new avenues for accountability and action to survivors and their advocates. It called for sexual violence to be addressed in transitional justice processes and excluded from the scope of amnesty provisions. Finally, the international community had accepted that the ceasefire could not be comprehensive if the gunfire stops, but the patterns of rape persist. In terms of institutional arrangements, 2009 saw the adoption of Resolution 1888, which equipped the United Nations with new infrastructure to respond. Resolution 1888 established my mandate, including as chair of the Interagency Coordination Network, UN Action Against Sexual Violence in Conflict. This resolution also established a team of experts on the rule of law and sexual violence in conflict to strengthen institutional safeguards against impunity at the national level, and called for women protection advisors to be deployed to the field to enhance our monitoring, reporting, and response. Subsequent resolutions have authorized specific arrangements at country level to deepen the evidence base for action and to increase the pressure on parties to comply with international norms by listing or naming and shaming those credibly suspected of abuse. They have emphasized the need for early warning and prevention, and to combat sexual violence employed as a tactic of terrorism, including in the context of human trafficking. Most recently, Resolution 2467, adopted in April of this year, calls for a holistic, survivor-centered approach to inform all prevention and response measures. In terms of our operational impact, the United Nations system is today supporting thousands of survivors who had once been invisible and inaccessible. In several conflict-affected settings, the operational arms of my mandate, the team of experts on the rule of law and UN Action Network, are delivering concrete projects to support survivors. Peacekeepers are now systematically trained to detect, deter, and respond to sexual violence as part of their operational readiness standards. Sexual violence offenses have become an integral part of international criminal investigation, thanks to a growing cadre of legal specialists in this field. Mobile courts and military tribunals have convicted combatants of sexual violence crimes in settings such as the DRC and South Sudan. Recently, the International Criminal Court handed down a historic 30-year sentence to Bosca Taganda on 18 counts of war crimes and crimes against humanity, including rape and sexual slavery. Last week, 3 former militiamen operating in eastern DRC, including the infamous warlord Cocody Coco, were convicted of rape as a crime against humanity. In addition, special designation criteria on sexual violence have been included in the sanctions regime for the Central African Republic, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Libya, Somalia, and South Sudan. As part of our operational methodology, which focuses on anchoring commitments at the national level, my office has signed joint communiqué to prevent and address conflict-related sexual violence with a range of affected countries. At the same time, we have begun to engage with non-state armed groups implicated in patterns of sexual violence in contexts such as the Central African Republic, Mali, and South Sudan. Excellencies, against this backdrop, and despite the progress we have made so far, we face an increasingly complex global security environment. Sexual violence continues to be used to spread fear and assert control. It remains a cruel tactic of torture, terror, and political repression, a brutally effective tool of displacement and dehumanization. The response continues to be slow. Impunity remains the rule, and justice the rare exception. Services are scarce, and stigma is so intense that some survivors choose to remain with their captors rather than having to face their families and feel the shame of their reproach. Security policy is still a male-dominated domain, despite clear and compelling evidence linking gender equality with peace. The international community has not yet adequately invested in tackling the structural root causes that perpetrate this violence, such as gender inequality. From Nigeria to Sudan, from Colombia to Bosnia and Herzegovina, women and girls are a critical constituency for conflict prevention and peace building. Yet, when formal negotiations and transitional justice processes begin, they are too often marginalized and pushed out of the picture. Addressing the root causes of conflict-related sexual violence requires offering people, and in particular young people, a hopeful future, including access to the dividends of peace and development, economic opportunities, and social services. There is a need for intergenerational dialogue to reaffirm our shared values, including the need to leave no one behind, to promote respect for diversity, tolerance, and societies free from violence. I'm encouraged to see young people mobilizing in pursuit of these objectives. Countless survivors have told me that justice is essential to helping them cope and transform their lives. Survivors also demand material assistance to rebuild their lives and livelihoods. Reparations are what survivors want most, yet receive least. At the dawn of a new decade for my mandate, it is time to deliver on these demands and put survivors first. A survivor-centered, rights-based response requires contextual solutions that give voice and choice to survivors, building their resilience and enshrining their experiences on the historical record. For several reasons, 2020 will be a pivotal year. In addition to marking the 20th anniversary of the Foundational Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security, and the 25th anniversary of the visionary Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, it will also mark 75 years since the advent of the United Nations itself. This means that a lifetime has passed since the founding promise of equality between men and women was enshrined in the UN Charter of 1945. Ladies and gentlemen, rape is the only weapon of war that is both powered by and perpetrates gender-based inequality. Strategies to protect women and girls from this scourge are also strategies to protect their full and equal participation in the political, economic, and social sphere. Ending sexual and gender-based violence, which cast a long shadow of terror and trauma over countless lives, is a critical step towards empowering women to shape their destiny and that of their communities and nations. So let us set the stage for a new decade of decisive action to move from resolutions to results and from horror to hope, to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, including the devastating scourge of wartime rape. Thank you.
I think that's quite a call to action, and we need to be all involved. Thank you very much, Pramila. And I'm delighted now to introduce the Undersecretary General and UN Women Executive Director, Phumzile, I'll try it again, Mlambo Nunguka. She is, as many of you probably already know, dubbed the most influential person in the world on gender policy. In 2018, she was given this designation. I think it carries forward to today. She has rallied a global movement of leaders in government, business, and civil society to end violence against women and girls. You have the floor, Phumzile.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. Colleagues and fellow panelists, thank you so much for the remarks that you have made. Thank you, Pramila. Thanks, Maria, for shining the light on this very important subject. Thank you to all of you who are here with us to mark the International Day of Elimination of Violence Against Women, and I want to underline elimination because that is the task. 16 days is an opportunity for us to highlight what we are doing, what the situation is, but 365 days is to do the work. So that what we highlight today is a lot about what we are going to do in the 365 days. And today we will hear some ideas about the work being done and what still needs to be done. And of course, next year, when we mark the 25 years of the implementation of the Beijing Platform for Action, we will be committing ourselves to do more work. As we mark also the 20 years of the Women, Peace and Security Resolution 1325, we will be further committing ourselves towards the elimination of all violence against women, including and in particular rape. We will be dubbing the campaign next year, Generation Equality, because we're claiming that we are going to be that generation that will change things, because we know so much now about what needs to be done, what works, what goes wrong, and we've mobilized a lot of people from every walk of life. This next 10 years, the decade of action that must complete the implementation to the extent that we can of the SDGs, has to be about fixing this issue as well. Rape isn't an isolated brief act. It is a gross violation of human rights with long-term, devastating, visible and invisible impact. It has life-changing effects that range from pregnancy, sexually transmitted disease, immense and long-term trauma, and unwarranted sense of shame. In some situations, women are rejected by their loved ones. They are even punished for being raped by institutions in society, including by the institutions such as religious institutions, cultural institutions, all of which are institutions that are supposed to look after society. In both conflicts and in peacetime, it often shapes women's decisions to move from their communities through fear of attack or the stigmatization of survivors. And yet, in many cases, perpetrators walk free. As a result, misogyny is strengthened. It feels like it is rewarded, it is tolerated, and therefore it makes it difficult for us to give a strong message to perpetrators that this crime has consequences. Although rape is so pervasive, it is badly underreported for the reasons that I've just mentioned, including the fact that the women are more likely to be poorly treated by law enforcement, humiliated, and treated like a problem. But we also know that there are situations and there are institutions for law enforcement that are trying to make this right, and we want to highlight their work. We are now, today, calling upon you and all of us to make sure that we do everything not to turn our backs on the millions of women and girls whose lives have been forever changed in this way. We are calling out impunity by calling out for broader culture, by calling out for the end of a broader culture that trivializes and permits rape, and calling for women to be given and treated in the way they are supposed to be treated. Most of all, we are calling for an end of rape and the rape culture that permeates our society. We know that rape, and Pramila has highlighted that, is rooted in a complex set of beliefs, power relations, and control. Dominant norms of masculinity assume that men's sexual entitlement is a given, and they create an expectation that men can control and coerce women, particularly in relation to sex. We also have seen jokes about women and even about rape being tolerated, with many being bystanders and missing an opportunity to intervene and to end the trivialization of this pain that women and girls suffer. Today, we're also calling on governments and services to take the positive steps necessary to scale up the response, which must include increasing accountability by making rape universally illegal, including in those countries which still allow marital rape, and holding rapists to account in every country that is a member of the United Nations. Putting victims at the center of the response, strengthening the capacity of law enforcement officials to investigate these crimes and respond in a way that shows that they believe survivors and are equipped to direct them to the right support services. Ending all forms of cultural practices and eliminating homophobia. Increasing the number of women in the police forces and supporting survivors with all legal aid and essential services that we can provide in our countries. One of the ways we tackle violence against women and girls at UN Women is through the multilateral respect framework, which informs policymakers about how to prevent and respond to violence against women with a collective commitment to action. Through the UN and EU Spotlight Initiative, we are also working to transform the inequalities that drive gender-based violence and eliminate global acceptance of sexual abuse and harassment of women and girls. Today, I also want to congratulate the UN Trust Fund to End Violence Against Women for achieving its resource mobilization target for grant giving to civil society organizations 1 year ahead of schedule. Because these civil society partners, as you will hear, do an exceptional job. I want to also thank you for all the good work that you do. Thanks to the voluntary contribution by member states and from the EU UN Spotlight Initiative, the Trust Fund has now been able to invest $40 million in more than 90 civil society organization projects in over 57 countries, working to prevent and end violence against women and girls just in 2019. And we will double the grants in 2020. And thanks again to the member states that have made this possible. 2 weeks ago, I was in Bonn. Yes, please. And there's room for more. We open for business. 2 weeks ago, I was in Bosnia-Herzegovina at the first ever global convention of the UN Trust Fund to End Violence Against Women grantees. One of them, of the participants, there is Anya, is here with us today. The convention focused on progress made since the adoption of the Beijing Platform for Action and towards the work that we want to do to end violence against women and girls. It ended with the UN Trust Fund's 2 youngest grantees, representative, presenting me with a set of recommendations to inform the process of global consultations on Beijing +25. They focus on key issues such as sustainable funding for the work of civil society, capacity and institution building, and the collection and use of evidence. I am fully committed to take these recommendations forward in upcoming meetings with some of you and deliberations, and to make sure that this becomes a crucial part on our work for generation equality. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, we are generation equality. If not us, who? Our responsibility is to end rape within a generation and to do all we can in the decade in the next 10 years, which is the decade that must make sure that we score very high on the implementation of SDGs. And again, I thank you for being here.
I think we just got very inspired. Thank you, Pumsila. I'd like to again introduce Ms. Ajna Jusic, who is going to look at this issue from a different angle. She's the president of the Association of Forgotten Children of War. She'll introduce us to her groundbreaking fight to uphold the rights and dignity of as many as 4,000 children who were born from wartime sexual violence in Bosnia and Herzegovina. You have the floor.
Good morning. Thank you for this opportunity to be here today with you. My name is Ajna Jusic and I'm 26 years old. I'm coming from Bosnia and I'm president of the Association Forgotten Children of War. So, 26 years ago, my mother was struck by a fate I would never wish to anyone. She survived war rape and she gave birth to me. For years she lived and she still lives in a society that thinks she is guilty for what happened, a society that was never ready to accept her. Sometimes I'm really angry on society, wondering why they rejected my mother or why they leave her all alone. But after some times I realized that looking for who to blame is not the answer. A systematic mistake was committed by state structures. Immediately after the war, the people and women survivors were left all alone without any support. A dark cloud of trauma came over our country and people struggled for survival only for themselves. Soon afterward, we got information that in Bosnia about 50,000 women and men had survived war rape, and that was it. There was no systematic move from the state to respond. Everything was left on the numbers and all the shame was left to the women survivors. It remains on the backs of the people who actively discriminate today, but only because they have never had opportunity to learn and to accept differences. Everything I said now made my mother to hide the truth from me for 15 long years. I believe it was the longest period in her life. In the time of discovering my identity and trying to figure out what I want to be in my life, I spent nights thinking about my father. I made so many scenarios in my mind, but just not the one where I was born as a result of war rape. I learned that I came to this world as a result of the worst and most aggravated crime against the human body, as a result of my mother's biggest trauma. I was speaking with my mother, and I promised her that I would make this world, a better place for her. And that is why I'm standing here in front of you today. I hope that I am on the right path. Together with my friends from association, also children born out of war rape and children whose fathers were members of peacekeeping mission, I am building a better future for all of us, not only in Bosnia, but in the whole world. Our association creates a model of working with the children born out of war, and we are the first who try to make a unique law on the children born of war. Every step we make is writing a small piece of history. We spent years of waiting for someone to discover us, wondering why our mothers continue to suffer because of system and unaccepting society, while knowing they deserve better after all they've gone through. The years has passed by without justice and without fairness. My mother's heroism has no measure. Her struggle for me was incredible and still is today. She fought for a child who had been deprived of fundamental rights, to know her origin, a child who didn't know and would never know family ties, a child who had no idea of their genetic predispositions, but who was born with the heart defect. She fought for me. Thanks to my mother and all survivors, their strength, I am who I am today. I am Aina Jusic, woman, daughter, human rights activist, a young person who believes in an equal society, who struggles to erase labels that are systematically imposed and socially created. I am 26 years old and I'm ready to invest 3 more times, 26 if not more, in a fight that will bring about more positive, more equal future for all children born of war. Today, as I stand here, somewhere in the world, there is a rape happening. Somewhere in the world, there is a woman's scream of sadness, pain, deprivation of dignity. Today, as I stand here, another child born as a result of rape, just been born. I will fight for the future of all children born of war. I will fight for them to not go through everything I went. And at the times, I went through a hell of peer violence. I went through fight with myself. Together with my mother, we fought with unjust state and ignorant society. Today, I'm fighting so that all of us, all children born of war, can claim their rights so that we can be educated without discrimination, so that no child has to look down in the shame at the medical corners like I have done. Every time I had to explain that I don't know my father's name because my mom survived the war rape. I fight and will fight for society to become empathy and live in solidarity, for society to have understanding, for society to support women survivors of rape, whether in a war or peace. I know that I cannot stop the wars, but I'm sure that I can act on the behalf of all vulnerable people who are with us and who unfortunately will be born with the effects of the new wars. Let's be a society of equal values, not a society of different labels. We build the bridges of peace, solidarity, empathy, support, but all above, we build bridges of humanity, because this is the only way that we can create a healthier society for us and for future generations. Thank you.
May I ask everyone to rise? Thank you for sharing that, your own personal, powerful story, and I think it took a lot of courage, I know, and I hope you felt all the support of this room. Somebody who heads communications, I know that, we can all make speeches about statistics of people who are facing sexual abuse, and also, as we hear, the children of rape. But there's nothing more powerful than storytelling, and I think we need to support those courageous women and also probably men who are survivors of rape to when they do have the courage to come forward with their stories, because then people will really feel compassion and want to do something. So thank you so much. Our final speaker of this panel today is Chinyere Iyo, Executive Director of Sexual Offenses Awareness and Victims Rehabilitation Initiative in Nigeria. This organization is a grantee of the UN Trust Fund to End Violence Against Women. She has striking stories to share from working with grassroots communities to stop sexual exploitation of children and adolescent girls. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I'm really excited to be here at this official commemoration of the International Day of the Elimination of Violence Against Women. Unfortunately, the issues being brought to the fore today are such that still leave many women and girls broken, in despair, and unable to find their voice. For instance, in my country, Nigeria, 1 in 4 girls have to endure sexual violence before they turn 18. Also, girls as young as 10 are still given as brides to men more than 4 times their age, while incidents of female genital mutilation remain prevalent. Despite this tragedy and continuing injustice, the culture of silence regarding discussions about sex remain largely a taboo, and disclosures about sexual-based violence remain painfully low, with more girls becoming vulnerable prey because of this silence. As a survivor myself of several years of sexual violence and rape, this injustice and the desire to do something about it largely served as motivation to break this sociocultural norm by coming out of the shadows and putting a face to the reality that 1/4 of girls in my country face. As efforts continued through our organization, many called what we were doing un-Nigerian and indeed un-African. But we continued unperturbed and continued to bring attention to these issues, as well as increase efforts to build the capacity of identified survivors and adolescent vulnerable girls through safe spaces that we create. Results of our work, however, show that most of the underage survivors we supported were being sexually abused in and around their homes in local communities where they indeed should feel safest. And so with the support of the UN Trust Fund, we were able to mobilize leaders of whole communities into community-based child protection committees, where they were thereafter empowered to to promote gender equitable norms and respond to issues of sexual violence against girls. We're also able to reach out to adolescent girls, build their capacity as peer educators, and advocate against sexual-based violence in their local communities as well as in their schools. As a small organization, the support we received from the UN Trust Fund also meant improved systems and structures for our organization and improved visibility as well, to increase our effort at addressing sexual violence against girls, especially in local communities where the sociocultural norms are really, the culture of silence is the norm. Also, a final external evaluation on our project, which was also commissioned by the Trust Fund, provided us with proof of the success and scalability of this intervention, which of course placed us in a position to receive additional funding to scale up our work into more communities. So while we agree that the issue of violence against women and girls has reached escalating proportions, I believe the UN Trust Fund has shown that partnerships with small grassroots local organizations, like the one I work with as well as Anna works with in Bosnia, we've been able to show that partnerships with small grassroots local organizations is one sure way of reclaiming back our own. Indeed, working together, I am convinced that the elimination of all forms of violence against women and girls is possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shinyera. What a fantastic example of taking action that has impact at the grassroots level. Thank you so much. So now, let's have a highlight, I think, of this morning, and that is to listen to the performance of the United Nations International School Senior Chorus. And thank you very much to our powerful speakers today. And with no further ado, let's let the music begin.
Sail on, silver girl. Sail on, silver girl. Sail on by. Sail on by. Your time has come to shine. All your dreams are on their way. See how they shine. Oh, if you ever need a friend, look around, go sailing like a bridge over troubled water. I will ease your mind like a bridge over troubled water. I will ease your mind. I'll be your bridge or troubled water. When you're down, I will carry you like a bridge or troubled water. I will lay me down, lay me down.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Deborah Charles, Managing Editor of DevX, the Global Development Media Platform. I'd like to thank, as they're leaving, the members of the United Nations International School Senior Chorus. That was a beautiful little interlude with amazing music, so thank you very much. It gives you hope to see those amazing young people. So we've already heard a lot to inform us today. We've heard a lot about the numbers and the degree to which there's a problem. 1/3 of women globally, I mean, that's a big number subject to violence, and those are just the ones reported. And it's a problem in war and in peace. So I'd like to welcome you to the second half of our program today, where we're gonna dig into some of which you've already heard, but we're gonna see through words and pictures from award-winning artists and activists who are standing against rape. We'll travel with them from a police station in the United States to a village in Rwanda and beyond. They'll remind us of the forgotten children of war and the horrific extent of sexual crimes against adolescent girls. They'll share with us how they're having a profound impact in extending services, safety, and the reach of the law, including through innovations supported by the UN Trust Fund to End Violence Against Women. They'll remind us all that in standing together against rape, we are that much closer to ending it once and for all. With our panelists, we'll talk about the power of storytelling to sound the alarm, cultivate compassion, mobilize action, and most of all, break the silence that allows this violence to fester unquestioned. I've spent my career mostly as a correspondent with Reuters news agency around the world, covering wars, coups, afterlife, the life around them all. And to me, it's always been talking to the victims of crime and violent experience. It's the hardest to hear, and it's the hardest to write, but it's the most important to tell. It's the most important story to get out there. But as everyone has said, one story about rape is one too many. So we'll see what we can talk about in our panel to see what we can do to try and get rid of that. Our panelists for this session come from the worlds of film and photography, education, and advocacy. Ms. Susanna Grant is the Academy Award-nominated writer, producer, and director showrunner of Netflix's limited series Unbelievable. Mr. Jonathan, come on up as Mr. Jonathan Torgovnik is an award-winning photographer and Emmy-nominated filmmaker who created Intended Consequences, Rwandan Children Born of Rape. And he's also the co-founder of Foundation Rwanda. Ms. Karen Namer is the Deputy Director of Programs and Director of the Program on Sexual Violence in Conflict Zones for Physicians for Human Rights. And we welcome back from the earlier session our two very powerful speakers, Ms. Chinyere Eyo, Executive Director of the Sexual Offenses Awareness and Victims Rehabilitation Initiative in Nigeria, and Aina Jusic, the President of the Association Forgotten Children of War from Bosnia and Herzegovina. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a quick chat with each one of the panelists, show some videos and photos to showcase the work and see who they are and understand them. Then we'll open it up to have a more broad conversation among the group about the current issue of rape and what we can do to seek justice. So let's start off with a short clip from Susanna's 8-episode series, Unbelievable. I know once I started watching it, I couldn't stop. It takes us directly into the experience of women who've been raped and have an excruciating ordeal in trying to seek justice. The series tells the story of Marie Adler, who files a police report claiming she's been sexually assaulted by an intruder in her home. Hundreds of miles away, detectives Grace Rasmussen and Karen Duvall investigate an eerily similar pair of intruder rapes and partner to catch a potential serial rapist.
I'm pretty positive that it happened.
Pretty positive or positive?
Maybe I blacked it out.
Marie, you're a smart young woman, clearly. You must understand the way you're handling this. You say one thing, you write another. There is a rapist, there isn't one. It's a dream, it's a blackout. You've told us 4 different versions. At this point, regardless of what the truth is, the only thing we know for sure is that you have told us at least 3 lies.
As I mentioned, it's very powerful. And Susanna, maybe you can tell us what is it that led you to develop Unbelievable?
Sure. This was an article that was published by ProPublica and the Marshall Project together by 2 wonderful journalists, Ken Armstrong and T. Christian Miller, and I read it when it came out, and I thought this is a story worth telling in another medium, and on Netflix, which was able to broadcast it to 190 countries at once. So I'm always interested in stories. You know, I was raised by a mother who said, leave it a little better than you found it. So I try my work to embody that ethic as much as possible. And this felt like a story that would definitely connect with people who felt invisible, unheard, and also possibly connect to the people who were not seeing something that was right in front of them.
And maybe you didn't intend to do this when you got into the project, but you really are helping to explain to the world that it's not easy to report a violent crime like rape, and it's not easy to be understood, or, you know, there's no one easy answer to everything.
Yes, that's absolutely true. And you know, we certainly never set out to make a public service announcement. My expertise is storytelling and filmmaking. So that's what we set out to do. The fact that it has become a useful tool for all you people who have been doing such remarkable work for so much longer than I have in this field is surprise and an added benefit. One thing I will tell you that I've become aware of, among many other things, is, as the Undersecretary said, it is a very complex problem. But I've also become aware of some relatively simple changes that can take place that can have a huge impact. And one is the processing of the backlogged rape kits in this country, and I imagine in other countries as well. You know, the jurisdictions that have processed those kits have had remarkable conviction rates, have made incredible discoveries, things they didn't know about the rate of serialized rape and the connection between acquaintance rape and stranger rape. And so there's tons of information to be had out there that's sitting on shelves in labs in this country. So the more, and that's a relatively simple change. And the other is what a difference it makes for law enforcement to be trauma-informed, to understand what trauma does to the brain and how that has to change how you investigate it. So those are two areas that, yes, it's an incredibly complex problem, but there are relatively simple solutions that can have a big impact on how we move forward.
I think you touched on the subject that will go with our next panelist, and the whole idea of storytelling, and that is really getting, you know, maybe not what you intended initially, but it is making a big difference, and it helps get that story out in a different way than maybe you'd get through a program, you know, a local program or something. So we're now going to look at a few of the photographs taken by Jonathan Torgovnik. I will use both names first. Jonathan's committed to using photography to catalyze social change. So he has been acclaimed for documenting issues of social injustice and human rights. Through his long-term project, Intended Consequences, and these photos are from that project, he produced a film and book documenting the stories of women raped in Rwanda's 1994 genocide, as well as the children born of those horrific encounters. So Jonathan, can you tell us what led you to Rwanda to even undertake this project?
In 2006, I was commissioned by Newsweek magazine to go to East Africa and visit a few countries where the first cases of HIV were identified on the occasion of the 25th anniversary of the first case identified of HIV in Africa. And one of the stops I made together with the health editor of Newsweek was in Rwanda, and we wanted to look at how rape was used as a weapon of war. And in the Rwandan genocide, specifically, how rape was used to infect women with HIV. We met with a young woman named Margaret that sat with us in a room and revealed to us how her whole entire family has been murdered, killed, slaughtered in front of her. She was hiding under a bed. She was later found by these militias, and together with another girl, she was only 16 years old, taken, put in a room, and every day for about 2 months, continuously gang raped by these militias. They would go out during the day and kill people, and come back in the evening and rape these girls. But she also mentioned that she contracted HIV from those rapes, and in passing, she also mentioned that she became pregnant and had a baby boy from those rapes. And, you know, I'll never forget her voice. I'll never forget that moment. I came back to New York from that assignment, and her voice was haunting me. That story was haunting me, and I was saying to myself, this is crazy. It's such an underreported story, such an underreported issue. This whole issue of children born of rape in conflict zones. And I decided to go back to Rwanda on my own accord, my own money, and just start investigating myself this whole issue, and slowly identified and interviewed and photographed many women that had similar experiences to Margaret. I learned that there's about 20,000 children that were born out of rapes in Rwanda in that 100-day span of the genocide. And the struggles that these mothers are going through with the relationships with the children, first of all, but also being ostracized and rejected by their own families if they had any surviving relatives because of cultural taboos, and the communities they live in, and basically felt completely isolated and thought that they're the only ones in the world that went through this and completely shunned from society. So, you know, I took on myself a mission as a photographer, as a journalist, to go and try to document these stories and photograph them. As you saw in these pictures, the portraits of the mothers with the children, and interview the mothers, and try to shed light on this issue. And that's how the project started.
And since that project, you've sort of switched over to not putting down your camera, but you have taken up the cause on your own as well. How did that, like, how did you make the switch? And maybe explain what you're doing at the Foundation Rwanda.
Well, you know, this project became, I mean, it became a big project. It became the most important project in my life and changed my life. And through the years of working on it and interviewing these women and talking to them, one of the last questions I always ask them in the interviews I have with them is, how do you see your future and the future of your children? And what I was amazed in all the 40 interviews I've conducted and meetings I had, is that almost all of them, the first thing they said was, you know, we want to make sure that our kids get good education, because we know we won't, many of them live with HIV/AIDS. They want to be, in their simple life, and with all the other issues and troubles they had, the first thing they thought about is education for the children, so they'll be able to provide for themselves in the future and acquire the skills to do that. And I found that really amazing. I mean, you know, with poverty and trauma and everything else around them, that's the first thing they were thinking about. So that was the first thought of something, maybe I can try to do something through this, the power of media, through the power of being able to share these stories to the world, to also maybe generate some support from the public. And when I finished the project and when I started publishing this work in magazines initially around the world, I insisted with the editors that they would have a call for action. When they publish this work and present the testimonies of these women and the photographs of the women, in the end of the story to mention that, you know, if you're reading this and you're affected, there's a way you can actually help. And that, I think, is a very important thing for all of us in the media that are working on these kind of issues, is not just report on it and hope that, you know, the awareness is enough, but maybe try to bring another added layer of a call for action that people can actually know how to do it, and just mention the website of an organization that is helping, etc. So we did that, and we were astonished that in the initial week of publishing this in Germany and England alone, $250,000 poured in from the readers of 2 publications. And I said, wait, you know, we can do something about this. We can actually help through this work. And this was the seed money that started Foundation Rwanda. So I put together a team. I co-founded it with Jules Schell, and we have even 2 board members here in the Aidan and Sarah. People that are actually, you know, I'm a photographer. I have no clue of how running a non-for-profit organization. I have passion, and I can go into a meeting and maybe raise some money, but you know, we have great people that, you know, put up a plan and, you know, establish a 401c3. And to date, we supported over 800 families in Rwanda. Basically, our mission was to provide, you know, the children born of rape in Rwanda were not considered survivors by the Rwandan government because they were born after the genocide, technically. So they were not part of this whole, like, package of help to survivors. And so our goal was to provide help them with the school fees to finish secondary school. That was the first part of our mission. The second part of our mission is to help the mothers with psychological support and support groups. And the third part of the mission is to help spread awareness about the consequences of sexual violence and genocide through photography and new media. And that's how it evolved, yeah.
Thank you. Moving on, our third panelist, we're now going to watch a short video on the work of the Physicians for Human Rights, which is transforming support for survivors of sexual violence in Kenya.
Over the course of several years, PHR has recognized that sexual violence cases are some of the hardest cases to prosecute. We started the program on sexual violence to bring together doctors, nurses, police officers, lawyers, and judges, psychotrauma counselors, and all the stakeholders who work closely with survivors to train them on the most effective ways to collect, document, and preserve forensic evidence of sexual violence to help support local prosecutions of these crimes.
The collaboration really that was brought about by PHR brought us together. We shared experiences, flushed out a number of issues that we thought that didn't quite work for us while working together.
Before my training with PHR, we had a lot of difficulties in the type of exhibits we were receiving from police officers, from health facilities, and we also had a very huge disconnect with the judicial system, who did not understand how to interpret our results or even what kind of work that we did here.
After the PHR brought us together, multi-sector actors, we were now able to work as a unit, whereby now, if I have a survivor, I'm able to send that survivor to the next person using a phone call.
A survivor comes to the police station. We normally liaise with the health. We normally contact the hospital and inform them that we are referring a survivor to them. The same case applies even to hospital. Once they have the survivor at the facility and the same survivor, they are referring the survivor to us, they normally get in touch with us.
They also give them the reference number. They can call me, and we've just grown this way, and now it's just one big, huge PHR family.
I used to do my work here as a doctor, and I thought that it only involved treating my patients without due regard to other players in terms of those who manage these patients, for example. Once I finished with my patient in terms of treating, and that was it.
But PHR came in a very unique way, that we were trained, somebody from the judiciary, from the administration, children department, social development, Ministry of Education, civil society, health, all of us were trained in one class.
So they brought on the survivor's voice to the table. And the survivor's voice is able to guide them in their attempt in bringing together all the aspects of survivor support.
Sexual violence cases are about medical evidence, forensic evidence before the court. And any little gap in the statutory documents, any small challenges, any small lapses, of course, in our jurisdiction, will serve to the benefit of the culprit.
The basic training we had in May of 2013 highlighted a systematic way of doing evidence collection, right from the clothing of the patient, the foreign material in the patient, taking samples like blood samples, other body fluids that might be useful in getting evidence.
Many survivors used to fear the police. They used to fear coming to report. But after the training, we changed the way we also handling our survivors who come to our facility.
We treat them as an emergency. Whenever they report, they're given first priority. And then the patient needs to be comfortable when you're examining, not the way we used to do before, whereby you just rush, force the patient to have an examiner, and then she leaves the place, but she's not comfortable with the service you have offered. So there's a big change with the way we are handling those cases.
By the time we were coming out of that training, we came out changed person. And we came out realizing that You cannot work alone on issues of gender-based violence. You need that other person, you need that other organization, so that you may be able to help the survivors.
Through that training, we became friends, and I learned the value of cooperation. So I would say that after the training, my approach really changed, because I appreciated more the concept of multisectoral cooperation.
So through our collaboration and doing things right the way they should be done, our women are getting justice.
A very powerful example of the progress that can be made through training and working together. Really nice. As you saw in the clip, Karen Namer is the director of the Program on Sexual Violence in Conflict Zones at Physicians for Human Rights, and she oversees the work we've just seen. Her program uses a grant from the UN Trust Fund to End Violence Against Women to train doctors, nurses, police officers, lawyers, and judges in the Democratic Republic of Congo, as well as Kenya. So Karen, what are some of the common reasons for cases to be reported but not prosecuted?
Thank you. And I just want to begin by thanking the UN Trust Fund to End Violence Against Women. We are so grateful for your support. We could not be here without you. There are so many challenges that make it very difficult for survivors to even come forward. We heard many of them this morning: stigma, fear of retaliation, harassment, intimidation, and that can deter many survivors from coming forward. But what we have seen time and again is that survivors do nevertheless come forward. They want their day in court. They want to access justice. And so many of those cases fail. They fail because of a lack of adequate evidence, and they fail because there are so many forces within the community that continue to intimidate the survivor and the service providers trying to support the survivors working on these cases. There are a range of political concerns, political interference, judicial independence can be an issue, tampering with the evidence. The families on the grounds in these communities can really intimidate the service providers. We hear stories of families of the accused showing up at the hospitals trying to tamper with medical evidence or intimidate the service providers. But what we have seen also time and again is that working in collaboration, doctors, nurses, psychotrauma counselors, police officers, lawyers, and judges together as a unit are stronger than if they were working as individuals. And consequently, we have seen that these small changes are having an enormous ripple effect, because when evidence is collected, it pushes back against the plausible deniability that these crimes are taking place. And this has come to fruition in a number of cases, chief of which is a case that took place in the Democratic Republic of the Congo called the Kavumu case, where dozens of young girls were being mutilated, terribly attacked and targeted, very young girls, 11 months old to 11 years old, over the course of 3 years. And the cases were really struggling to be investigated. And over time, we understood why. Because the militia that was targeting these young girls was being headed by a sitting member of provincial parliament in Congo, a very powerful person, and nobody wanted to touch that case. But with adequate evidence, strong evidence through these service providers that we had been training, really compelling medical evidence, strong support from the police, strong political will from the prosecutors, we were able to see this case ultimately go forward. And I'm thrilled to say that in December 2017, After years of work, the sitting member of parliament had been stripped of his immunity. He and 10 militia members were found guilty of crimes against humanity for rape.
So it's not just in, working together, but it's that these communities need to feel like they need to move forward and do something to make a difference, right? To change.
That's exactly right. The political will is foundational, and that certainly comes from the government. The government needs to support the service providers, these communities, civil society organizations, the survivors and the families, but also the communities, the civil society organizations, the groups, the families, the survivors themselves need to feel that support, and changing attitudes and behaviors, cultural attitudes towards survivors is paramount. We need to shift the stigma away from the survivor and put it on the perpetrator.
A perfect segue to our next panelist. Thank you, Karen. Ms. Chinere Iyo, next to me, I'm turning the wrong way, joined us earlier and was very eloquent in explaining a lot of what your organization is doing, and your initiative, your Sexual Offenses Awareness and Victims Rehabilitation Initiative was started by you in 2011 to prevent child sexual abuse and support survivors. And as Chinere told us, that she herself is a survivor of sexual violence and has written eloquently about her experience in her book, When Life Just Isn't Fair. So this is sort of building on the last question, but why do entire communities need to be involved in stopping sexual exploitation and abuse of children?
Thank you. The issue of a culture of rape is practiced in communities held by community members. And so if community members believe that those who have been raped and those who have experienced sexual violence somehow have a hand in what, should I say, befell them, you find out that survivors will not come out to report. We also see situations where survivors and where community members will pressure these children and girls, even when they do come out to speak, they pressure them to keep quiet because of the shame they will bring, not just to the family members, but to the community as a whole. We see situations where perpetrators are more or less supported because they keep whipping up sentiments. He's a good member of the society, he's a hardworking member of the community, forgetting that sexual violence against children and particularly girls is a crime and not a family matter to be deliberated upon. And sometimes we've seen situations in my country where sometimes these girls who are being abused are made to marry the men who raped them, just so as to save face. So it is important that communities get to understand that sexual violence is a crime, and the people who commit these crimes are the perpetrators, who are most often men, rather than putting the blame on the children and the girls who are survivors, so to speak. Yeah. So it is important.
And from your experience, what's been successful in shifting the way that people think about sexual violence, particularly against children?
Uncommon, and a lot of people will have not gone this route, but I would say singularly having adult survivors of sexual violence come out to speak. Breaking the stigma, breaking the belief that once you're raped, your life is over, you have nothing, like in my country, nothing good will happen to you afterwards. But we've seen situations where in our sensitization rallies, we go to schools, we go to communities, we speak to parents and have survivors come out sharing their stories of pain, sharing how they were victimized, but sharing how they've been able to receive support and overcome the trauma. So you find that parents become, they feel better about reporting such cases, because then they believe that, all is not lost for their daughters, and then these daughters can receive help. We've also seen more cases of these girls after such meetings, the girls actually coming out to report that, hey, okay, so what you reported, what you told us about is actually happening to me. We've seen situations, it's really terrible. We've seen situations where girls who are being abused by their own fathers and they're afraid to come out because of societal stigma, because of what the community will say. But hearing fellow survivors speak about these issues and they receive hope, they know that they will be supported because there's a support base, that can help them not just heal, but also support them in accessing justice, so that the perpetrators can be brought to book. I would also say that something we are beginning to work on is engaging men and boys, especially in an African society where, will I say, the men and the traditional leaders are custodians of these norms and traditions. So when we see men, when we see boys coming out and speaking up against sexual violence and say, hey, it's not okay to sexually harass a girl. It's not okay. You don't exhibit your manhood by how you violate another woman. You find out that other men tend to listen to men when they talk about these issues rather than women speaking for themselves. So I would say survivors coming out, men also being brought on board as allies, And then lastly, I would say also sensitizing and speaking to parents, because mindsets have to change, where they are made to understand that you silence this issue, you have let down your child. Because you're more concerned about the family reputation and the family name rather than this child who just needs to be supported by you and made to understand that she didn't do anything wrong. She's the one that needs support and help. Yeah.
Thank you, Chinere. You've already met Miss Aina Yusic, who was so eloquent, and everyone was, very emotional in hearing your experiences earlier. And as mentioned, she's the president of the Association Forgotten Children of War. As a young activist, she's fighting for gender equality and against sexism and sexual violence. In 2018, she received the Person of the Year award in Bosnia and Herzegovina, which she devoted to children born of war and to women who survived rape during war. So we are seeing some of the photos from an exhibition in Bosnia and Herzegovina, right? In Bosnia.
Yes. Hello, thank you for introduction. This picture is of exhibition Breaking Free. Breaking Free exhibition talk about children born out of war, out of rape, peacekeepers' babies, and we talk about heroism of our mothers. On the first picture you saw the hero. She's name is Sabina, and it's my mother. With Breaking Free exhibition, we are trying to make connections with society. We are trying to make communication with them, to face them with our stories, because I think it's really time that we started to talk on this topic, because for me, in my case, I cannot live in dark and invisibility anymore. I'm tired and I need to scream and tell the society, okay, guys, I'm here, please don't call me a child of hate, because I love and I want to be loved, because I'm normal person, and I don't hate and I don't do crimes because I'm born on this way. Yeah, is the point of our Breaking Free exhibition.
And you're turning your actions into, you're actually not just talking, you're trying to do something. I believe you're working on a new law that you'd like to introduce.
Yes.
Maybe you could tell us about this related to children born of war?
Yes, we are trying to make a unique law on children born of war in Bosnia. Maybe if you don't know, in Bosnia we have a really complicated system, but the point is that we are trying to make equal law for all children born of war, because unfortunately in Bosnia, our mothers, survivors, they don't have the equal rights because of the 3 parts of the country that we live there. Our law wants to talk about recognition. It's very important that we be recognized by the state, and it's very important that we have a way how to help ourselves, how to help each other, because every September in my life, every September was the month of the scholarships, for example, and I always just sit there and listen to my friends how they want to apply here, apply there, and I was like, okay, I need to find 25 jobs because I need to finish my studies, and I need to fight for myself, and I need to fight for all the children born of war, because I did not have right to have any kind of scholarship, to have anything, and because of that, this law is very special and very important, and on the end, it is very important to our mothers, because, they live with us, and they know that there is no paper who talk about their children, and this law for them will be the as my mother said, the best thing for me in my life. Yeah, that's it.
This is an amazing group of people up here. And we've learned a little bit about the amazing and very difficult work everyone has done and is going through and is doing. Now, I'd like to open it up to a conversation with everyone and because we have such interesting and unique viewpoints up here. Looking at, as everyone has acknowledged, there is sort of a culture of rape. It's for some reason, it's around the world. It's not unique to one country. It's not unique to one part of the world, to, an economic situation of a country at all. It's pervasive, and oftentimes it's not challenged or punished. And we hear sexist jokes. Women are objectified. Comments about what women wear. But basically, is there a way? How do we change this? How do we change this culture and move on to getting rid of, this is not something that's that everybody, well, yeah, it's just done. How do we move beyond that?
I think it's, many of the panelists have touched on aspects of this. I think it's really important to remember that this is not a women's issue, it's not a girl's issue, it's an issue about human rights. Women's rights are human rights. And I think we need to bring men to the table to be part of these discussions. I go to so many conferences, and there's so few men in the room, and that needs to change. They need to be part of the solution. They can be part of the solution. They are part of the solution. That's a critical component to changing attitudes and behaviors, and that filters down to a whole range of other communities who ought to be part of the discussion. I think colleagues here have mentioned faith leaders. They carry enormous clout in their communities. They're change makers, and we need to bring them into the discussion as well. Informal leaders, administrative chiefs, faith leaders, judges, anyone who carries a certain level of importance, privilege, credibility in their communities, they are the people who need to be part of the conversation and part of the solution.
Jonathan's the man on the table here, and I suppose in order to sort of break the stigma, talk about it, make sure people know about it. You kind of did that with your reporting, but how do you handle? It's not an easy thing to do. Not only are you a man, but you're going and trying to talk to people and get people to talk about things. So how can you make that work?
Well, in the specific case of the project I worked on, what was something I sensed, and of course I was a man and I was sitting in front of these women that went through horrific experiences, but because they felt so shunned from their immediate society, immediate family, as a foreigner coming in to report on it and to listen to their stories that they've kept inside for so many years, they almost did not see me. It was kind of, I was a vehicle for them, for their story to be told. And they knew that I came with some kind of credible, with a social worker that they trust, etc. And, they really wanted their stories to be shared with the world, because they felt forgotten then, and they feel forgotten now. And I asked myself the same questions because, you know, they really opened up to levels I did not imagine, to details of how they were raped, to the, you know, very deep problems relationships they have with their children, etc. So I think one of the things I noticed in terms of also the healing process was the fact for them to see that someone cares about them. The little thing of someone coming and caring about them and listening to them is already, you know, and they actually verbalize that because I've kept in touch with them for many years and say, you know, the fact that you came and you came again, and then the foundation came and, you know, suddenly we realize we have a back. You know, you understand, especially in the Rwandan context, many of these women not only lost their immediate families, but lost, you know, 100 to 200 people of their extended family. They have nothing, no safety net, no one to go to. So someone coming and giving them attention and collecting their testimony and sharing it with the world starts empowering them to start the healing process. That's kind of how. So my, you know, being a man, I don't know, you know, in a way, I think it was the sensitivity I had towards their story and the willingness to listen to them that was enough for them to share it.
Two things. I want to buttress what Karen said about the need to engage leaders in the space. Interestingly, before I attended the UN Trust Fund grantee convention that just finished, I knew sexual, you know, gender-based violence was an issue across the world, but I didn't really know how bad it was. I thought it was just an African issue with the sociocultural norm. So it was really interesting and shocking to see that the same issues we are dealing with in Africa, the sociocultural norms and all of that, is still an issue in other parts of the country. Speaking as an African coming from Nigeria, I would say it's really critical that traditional rulers, traditional leaders are brought on the table and engaged, because they are the custodians of the law. Basically, nothing can change without them coming on board, because they are the ones that will declare that a particular way of life that has been accepted as a culture has been changed. You know, so it will mean, you know, engaging them and helping them see that some of these practices are actually violations, you know, against children. But I also want to particularly stress that it's important that we begin to engage small grassroots organizations. And that's why I will give a big thumbs up to the UN Trust Fund, you know, because so many times a lot of the organizations, well, speaking from experience, that get all of the funding and are supported to do all of the work are the big organizations out there, you know, that have the capacity, that have the clout to do the work. Whereas a lot of the work being done are done by the grassroots people who are down in the field, who understand the community, who understand the people, you know. And so I would say it's really critical that we begin to engage these advocates, these activists that are down there with the people, who understand how these things work, who understand the mindset of the people, and who understand what it will take to actually begin to change. Yes, one person at a time, but then that's how the work will get done. One person at a time, getting to understand that this is an issue. It's not girls' rights, it's not women's rights, it's a human rights issue. And if you support women, you support girls, you are supporting the community. You know, my people will say, you feed a man, you've only fed him, but you feed a woman, you educate a woman, you've educated a whole community. You know, so I think it's in understanding that local grassroots communities and activists need to be supported to go into the field where they can get their hands dirty and actually do the work.
So I think that on the first step, I think, but when we talk about Bosnia, but I think it's the role in the whole world is we need to learn society that rape is not just a problem of the woman who survived the rape, and she is not guilty for that, you know, because we still live in society who has different opinion, you know, and we still live in society who, you know, I finished all my studies without any, like, single one lesson in the school, on the university, who talk about rape, which talk about rape, you know, and what are the consequences of the rape. I really, in that point of my life, I needed to be educated about that, you know, because I needed to understand everything, and I didn't have opportunity. And because of that, I think that education can be the way of the prevention. And if we don't educate us, the future generations, we will have the problem. So I think that we need to start right now to save the world and save the woman. Yes, thank you.
I think Susanna has an interesting point of view as being, you know, probably in the research that you were doing for this series, it taught you sort of maybe unique views on experiences of women who are going through rape, and sort of what needs to be done to make sure that it's like people realize and believe that they have really done this, and how sort of what needs to change in kind of the overall mindset. It's partly training, partly education, but did anything else cross your mind with that?
Well, I'll tell you, I'm so moved by hearing all my fellow panelists, because one thing I became very aware of in doing this and speaking to a number of survivors was that there's no one way to respond to this, which is surprising to people. People bring an expectation to survivors of rape that there's a way they should be responding, and when survivors don't meet those expectations, they're often discounted. But the one universal, I would say, is that I did see a lot of people shrinking away from society and isolating with the stigma and shame that's associated with this crime, which is, of course, as you say, it's the perpetrator who should carry the shame, not the victim. So I'm so impressed and moved by the openness that's being brought to this issue globally. And now I've forgotten your question, because I wanted to reflect on the statements of my.
That's fine, because that was actually an important element. But just sort of, what struck you most about just the problems that women are faced in reporting rape, which is you sort of talked about, and how to go about handling it. But you know, I think we're all just responding the same.
Yeah, well, it was interesting. We did our series looks at the issue specifically through the lens of investigation, and we followed one, and these investigations did happen. One that goes very wrong in ways that are quite ordinary, and then one that goes very exactly as it should. Justice is served, and the victims are believed, and achieves a positive outcome. And it became very clear to me that it is largely a training issue, as a lot of we've experienced in this country, and I imagine it's a global issue. Law enforcement training can have massive implications in society, and specifically around the area of expectations of how a survivor of sexual assault should be behaving, what to look for to be for their credibility. And in many jurisdictions, the first job of the person investigating the sexual assault is to assess the credibility of the survivor, which automatically seems like the absolutely wrong place to start. You know, in no other crime is that the first question that's asked. And I know I've met a number of people in this country who are doing really good work on changing the training of law enforcement, but you know, it's district by district. It's as you say, it's a small community issue, and it needs to be played out within small communities. But I've seen a lot of people doing really, really moving work in that field.
I think one thing I will say, so that we do not forget, it has been mentioned, but I think it's really critical that we also begin to deliberately support survivors. Deliberately support survivors. I know it can be overemphasized, but a survivor can be so supported that the survivor becomes an advocate and an activist, like we see here on this table. So I would say that in helping to end gender-based violence against women and girls, I think that space needs to be created where the survivors will not feel judged, where they can come out and speak about what has happened to them, the processes they are going through emotionally, psychologically, how they are dealing and coping, with their issues. Also, without the pressure of needing to do anything. If it's just, to come out to talk. We just finished a training, for survivors who came out, and you could just see their eyes lit up after just 3 days spending time with them. Some of them came out for the first time. We put up a call for volunteers, those who want to go into communities and schools to talk to children. And after the 3-day training, more than half of the participants stood up one after the other talking about how they were survivors and how that space had given them the opportunity to recognize that first and foremost, it was not their fault. Because societies will always, what were you wearing? Where did you go? Why did you go there? Why didn't you say anything? And they internalize the shame, internalize the belief that probably I did something to contribute. And that thought alone can lead to so many mental health issues. So I think it's important that even in the work that we do, we create that space where we give survivors the opportunity to heal and choose survivor-centered approach to choose how they want to go about, dealing and responding to the issues that they have had to, to face.
I was only looking to you to see if you had something to say, because it seemed like you did.
Yeah, I think that that's absolutely right. And I would just say with respect to the justice process and to some of the points that were raised earlier, so much of the interventions and support that are given to communities or that training supports interventions at the service level through a justice process. But just picking up on your point, I really want to emphasize that a story, a situation, a healing, the pain, it doesn't end when the justice process ends. And so we really need to take a holistic approach to supporting survivors in all the ways that you've just articulated, long after the justice process ends and around the justice process. And I want to pick up on a point that was made on the earlier panel, and also that you made, Jonathan, that we need to enforce reparations. And reparations is not strictly compensation. It's a whole range of support for survivors, including access to meaningful education where that access was cut off. So I think that as a call to action, we really need to listen to survivors, to hear what it is that they need, the support that they want, and we need to mobilize around them to ensure that we provide and enforce the reparations that meet those very needs.
Kind of lead me to want to ask each one of the panelists on what's one action that someone can take up right now to make a difference? And since you just talked, I'll start over here. You think of one thing that people can do. Someone here. Right. Yeah, right now. What can they do?
I always thought the answer on this question is that please go home and talk with your friends, with your family, because then just give them this experience that you have now here with us and talk with them about the existing of the children born out of rape, that we are real persons and normal people. Yeah.
I would echo the same sentiment. We made this show, and really, I did not anticipate that a show about sexual violence would meet with a tremendous audience, but the viewership has so far exceeded our wildest expectations that it's led me to believe that we're living in a world that is eager to have this conversation, and it's time for these stories to be told and to come out of the shadows. And there is a population out there that's ready to have this conversation and ready for change. I've seen that and felt that very palpably. So yes, I'd say tell your stories, and if you don't have a story to tell, listen and seek them out and be an active, engaged listener.
Deborah, you asked for one thing, and I will...
I know, sorry.
So we don't have too many men in the room, but I will throw a challenge to every man here and ask that within this period, you vocalize and put action behind your belief in the he for she. In other words, go into the social media space, write out either on a whiteboard, on a white sheet, I stand against sexual and gender-based violence, and tag and challenge 10 other men to do the same thing. So please, I need not just the claps, but actually that we will go.
Wait. I agree. I think spreading, the awareness and talking about the issue, especially with men, is the way to go. And if you feel extra motivated, you can donate to Foundation Rwanda as well.
I would only add that it's very easy to feel alone and isolated with one voice. But I think that what we've heard today and what we're hearing and what we'll hear over the course of the next 16 days, and as the earlier panelists shared as well, over the next 365 days, we are not one voice, but we're many, many voices together, and we have to amplify our voices in unison to speak out against this terrible, terrible violation.
I think they all summed it up pretty well. I mean, this has been a fantastic morning, I think, of sharing so many great stories, hearing about the amazing work that people are doing, how storytelling can really be important, how getting the word out is very important, break the stigma, come out of the shadows. That is a theme that I think we're hearing now and we're going to keep hearing for hopefully 365 days this year, next year, next year, next year. So I'm grateful to all of our panelists for being willing to share so many of your experiences and your thoughts and great ideas. But let's remember today as we leave, our purpose is not just to listen to these amazing stories, but to act. That means each one of us in whatever capacity, as long as we have to, so that these stories don't have to get told, that there are no stories to tell. The world's making progress in standing against rape, driven by strong panelists like those who are here today. But much more needs to be done, especially over the next 2 years as we look under the UN Secretary General's campaign, Unite by 2030 to End Violence Against Women. Today we can imagine a world free of rape and sexual violence, but tomorrow let's make it a reality, or at least not too far off in the future. So as we leave here today, I'm going to pose the same question to every one of you that I posed to these panelists. What is one commitment you can make as you walk away from here? What can you do today, in the next few days, to make a difference? So with that, I want you to think about that and head out. I'd like to thank you to all of our panelists and to everyone for having this great day, a great program. Thank you.